Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I am Maria Sciano, the Director of Accessibility Services at the County College of Morris. I have worked at CCM for almost 7 years. I am the co-advisor for the LGBTQ plus student union. I am the president of New Jersey AHEAD, the Association of Higher Education and Disability. And I was recently appointed by Dr. Amanda Kraus to the International AHEAD Board as a director at large to represent community colleges nationally. I identify as a disabled lesbian woman in my mid-40s. My preferred pronouns are she, her, hers. I am white, Italian, and have long brown hair and brown eyes. I am wearing glasses and a black shirt. I also have a screensaver behind me that has the rainbow flag, along with multiple other colors, a fist, and the disability symbol. I am married to my amazing wife, Susan, and we have 4 incredible children. I am a first-generation college graduate. I was a full financial aid recipient. Tonight, I would like to take a moment to breathe, settle my emotions of excitement and anxiety, and speak my truth in this privileged space. How is it even possible that I'm in the same virtual room with Judith Heumann? I could have never imagined this opportunity. This truly means the world to me. My journey in the disability community is one that may seem familiar. In the beginning of my professional career, I did not know if I would belong. My own personal definition of disability was a reiteration of the negative stereotypes I was told my whole life. In 1990, the year the American with Disabilities Act was signed, I started high school. I was a shy, quiet girl that kept to myself and pretended that all was right with the world. I had no sense of self or true understanding of my own identity. I lied. I lied about so many things. I hid. I tried so hard to fit a particular mold, mend to the conventional expectations around me, be the good girl I was expected to be. I did well in school, got good grades, and moved forward. I had no idea the disability rights movement was happening around me. At 19, I would lose a close friend in a tragic accident. And in that moment, my life changed forever. I realized that I had lost her, a friend, someone that I had started to get close to. But in my loss, the overwhelmingly crashing realization hit me. My friend really had no idea of who I actually was. The real me, the person I was on the inside, not the facade of a well put together young adult. From there, I found my voice, and I realized that my story was not one to hide, but one to own. I was a child, an abused child. My mother, beaten within inches of her life, would spend nights in a battered women's shelter in Brooklyn, trying desperately to save her children. My brother, born with a cleft lip and a cleft palate, had surgery after surgery, my mother somehow arranging donated care. My older sister would take the brunt of all the chaos. And my father, the person I hardly spoke of, was in federal prison for drug trafficking and numerous other convictions. My mother, also named Judith, will always be my hero. She raised 3 educated, professional children all by herself. I was gay. I was gay in a time when being gay was considered evil. My friends were fighting HIV and AIDS, and truth be told, I had experienced trauma on a level that most people in my personal and professional life know nothing about. See, my disability identity is not apparent. You do not have the ability to see it. It's not visible. It is layered, it is deep. For those still committed to the medical model definition of disability, it is diagnosable. Some say curable. In 2008, 2010, the ADA would be amended and the definition of disability would now include mental health status. This would impact higher education in an incredible way. Fast forward to the world of higher education disability services, I would say that I was forced into the field in many ways. I was a recent graduate from the NYU School of Social Work. I had worked in higher education for 9 years at that point, and my role was to supervise 25 staff members at the NYU's Health Center. Then, overnight, definitely because I had earned the title of fixer, I was told that I had to fill in for an American Sign Language interpreter that had quit. Okay, let's be real. I did not know sign language. I did not have any working knowledge of disability or representation, and I certainly did not identify as disabled at that point in my life. I started in my new position as deaf and hard of hearing coordinator at the NYU Moses Center and tried to learn everything possible from the people around me. I have many to thank. From there, I fell in love with the work, knowing that I did not necessarily see it as work. I saw it as activism. I found my calling, the place where I belonged. A career was born, and I would do whatever possible to make a difference. Every student I meet, every piece of documentation that I am given, every story I listen to, I take as a gift of privilege. I am given an opportunity to meet people, all different types of people, humans, students with strengths and weaknesses, with passion and conviction and drive, the want to learn regardless of what that learning process will look like, the want to be present in their education, to have an accessible education, and to be seen like everyone else. Disability is the largest minority group at CCM, with over 1,000 students that choose to identify. Disability crosses all boundaries of race, ethnicity, economic status, sexuality, and gender. Education should never be one size fits all. All is filled with differences. As Judith Heumann herself points out in her memoir, I understand labels. I have been told that I am too aggressive, too outspoken, too Brooklyn, too strong, too straightforward, a victim, and that I need to give people time to learn. These are all labels I accept from those around me. I realize that they say these things to make themselves feel comfortable. I have endured their judgments my whole life, but I have learned to persist, to persevere despite setbacks. There are other labels though, the ones I choose to take in and hold tight to my heart. Mentor, advocate, ally, survivor, friend, daughter, sister, mother, wife, and finally, the Wonder Woman lady. My students know what I'm talking about when I say this. I pray that in 20 years, accessibility services office no longer exist, that education is so accessible, there is not a need to accommodate, but rather a fully inclusive education environment for all. Until then, I will continue this journey and thank Judith Heumann for literally creating the path. And to use a quote from her in my continued mission, not all no's are equal. Some no's are just wrong. Professor Soltis, thank you so much for collaborating with Accessibility Services in New Jersey ahead to make this night possible. Thank you, CCM, for your commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And finally, to the Legacy Project and the dedicated faculty. You got this so right, and I thank you for it. Professor Soltis, take it away.
Thank you so much, Maria. I really appreciate your leadership at CCM. My name is John Soltes, and I am a white man in his mid-30s who has short brown hair. I am wearing a purple shirt and a blue jacket and sitting in my family room with a couch and closed windows behind me. I'm an assistant professor at CCM and also serve as co-chair of the Legacy Project. It is my honor to welcome Judith Heumann, an internationally recognized leader in the disability rights movement, to tonight's event. We are especially grateful for all the representatives that are here from local colleges and different community groups, including Disability Rights New Jersey, the Dawn Center for Independent Living, College Steps, and especially to the New Jersey Association on Higher Education and Disability, NJ Ahead, as our co-sponsors. Judy Heumann is a person who needs no introduction, but I'll give it my best. As readers will come to know if they pick up a copy of her new memoir, Being Human, Judy began her struggle for equality early in life. As she tells us, paralyzed from polio at 18 months old, her life story includes the fight to attend grade school in Brooklyn, her winning of a lawsuit against the New York City school system for denying her a teacher's license, and eventually becoming an activist and advocate for disability rights. Most notably, Judy was one of the leaders of the Section 504 sit-in in the 1970s. As an essay by the late Kitty Cohn points out, Section 504 was based on the language of previous civil rights laws that protected women and minorities. It recognized that society has historically treated people with disabilities as second-class citizens based on deeply held fears and stereotypes. In theory, 504 states that an individual cannot be excluded from participation or subjected to discrimination from any program or activity receiving federal assistance. However, after 504 passed, regulations and enforcement timelines needed to be set up. Many debates ensued, and the regulations were never set forth. Months became years, reverting the United States to a time when, as Kitty Cohn put it, responsibility for the consequences of disability rested only on the shoulders of the person with the disability, rather than being understood as a societal responsibility. Eventually, a series of nationwide protests occurred, peaceful and following the outline of previous civil rights movements. Judy and Kitty led the protests at the San Francisco Federal Building. They decided to stage a sit-in. We'll be talking about that tonight. It's a protest based on education, awareness, and recognition of civil rights. In many ways, the 504 sit-in led to the creation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which prohibits discrimination against persons with disabilities in several areas, including higher education, transportation, employment, public accommodation, communications, and access to government programs and services. In more recent years, Judy has taken her activism to a global audience. She served in the Bill Clinton administration as Assistant Secretary for the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services. She was the World Bank's first advisor on disability and development, and she also served in the Barack Obama administration as a special advisor for international disability rights. Her connection with Barack and Michelle Obama extends to today. The former president and first lady executive produced the Oscar-nominated documentary Crip Camp, which features Judy and other leaders in the disability rights movement in their younger years, as they enjoyed summers at Camp Jened in the Catskills, participating in sports, making new friends, making out with new partners, and empowering one another as human beings. It was this film that brought Judy to our event tonight. I saw the documentary on Netflix a few months ago, and I realized I needed to stop being a professor and become a student. I needed to educate myself about disability rights and the movement. And this led me to many books, articles, and videos about Judy, about Kitty Cohn, about many others. On a whim, I contacted Judy through Facebook, and it was such a thrill when the Facebook Messenger app on my phone told me there was a reply in my inbox. Judy has helped establish policy and laws that have brought disability rights into the national and international public spheres. In her memoir, she writes, "We all need to be moving forward together, taking care of our families and the planet. When whole groups of people become segregated from others in our society, it weakens the fabric of our democracy." She adds that asking for equal opportunity is not asking for too much. It is my honor to welcome Judy Heumann to the Legacy Project. Welcome. I guess maybe to begin, this has been a momentous week in many ways because that documentary was nominated for an Oscar and you were at the ceremony. Could you talk a little bit about your experience on Sunday?
Well, it was kind of amazing. Obviously, I never thought that I'd be at the Oscars. And it was nominated in the Best Documentary category. And so I almost didn't go because the numbers of people that were invited were very minimal because of COVID. And I was able to be invited because Jimmy LeBrecq was able to invite one. So I was invited, and a woman who runs the Impact Campaign, which is also supported for Crip Camp, she was the other plus one. So it was great to be there. And it's a whole rigmarole, you know, people dress all up, and I have some nice clothes, but I don't have anything that really was on the level of what people wore. And so I was very lucky. I have a friend who is a fashion photographer and also has been photographing disabled individuals for many years. His name is Rick Gadati in New York. And he introduced me to, it's called Mark Arian NYC. And they designed the outfit that I wore. And she also, Alexandra O'Neill, who was the one who designed my clothing, also had designed for Dr. Biden. So I love Dr. Biden's clothing for the inauguration, and it was like a real honor. But, you know, we've been doing an amazing amount of press work for the last year that Netflix was significantly involved with, Jimmy, Nicole, and Sarah. And then I was involved with some of what was going on. Plus, as you mentioned, my book also came out last year. So, you know, dressing up like that, getting my hair done, my makeup done, I never had that done before. And, you know, going, and it was a really momentous because we were the only visibly disabled people at the event. So Jimmy in a wheelchair, Andre in a wheelchair. Andrea's got a dog, a beautiful dog that everybody falls in love with, and myself, and then Nicole and Sarah. So that in and of itself was, you know, people were not exactly looking, but they were kind of sideways looking. And we were able to go on the red carpet. And I watched the Academy Awards every year. So it was very surreal. I watched all the documentaries, and I thought they were really good documentaries. And it was a privilege. And I think one of the important aspects about this is I think the media is really, at least at this point, recognizing that the value of this film is more than historical documentation of the movement, but also really elevating the issues that many of us have been concerned about, which is absence of appropriate representation in media of disabled people. So at the Oscars and after the Oscars, you know, it was important to see articles that were being written. And one of the, so BBC listed, I think, the top 13 dressed people on the red carpet. And our group of 5 was listed, plus the dog. And so those are things that, you know, you never can consider will happen. And then Marley Matlin is a friend. She was actually the person who was moderating the section for documentary films. So it was a little bit disappointing because I thought, oh, it'd be really great if we win and Marley is the one who's introducing it. But that didn't happen. But nonetheless, I think it's amazing that this film was selected to be in the top 5. And so for that, I'm very proud.
I'm curious, could you compare and contrast a little bit of your experiences growing up in Brooklyn and then going up to the Catskills in the summer to Camp Jened? You know, how different was that of an experience?
Did you go to camp?
I did not. I had a rec camp, but it wasn't like an overnight camp.
So for me, you had a what, John?
I had like a recreation camp, but not an overnight camp.
Too bad. Well, for those of you who went to overnight camp, I mean, I think actually most kids really like going to camp. And so it could have been camp anywhere, because the camp itself was not what one would call regal at all. Sorry. You know, you can see, you know, with bunks made out of wood and nothing fancy at all. But it was really, my brothers went to camp, but the camp they went to didn't accept kids with physical disabilities. So going to Juned, and I went to another camp before that, Camp Oakhurst, when I was younger, was a really important experience in my life for many reasons. One, you know, being away, I don't think it was so much being away from the city, you know, but being away from family. I loved my family, they were great, but, you know, I was very dependent on them because I needed, like now, help getting dressed and undressed and doing many things that I couldn't do by myself. And so it'd be my mother or father that would help. And so, you know, just the act of going to camp and having other people who were there to assist me also enabled me to be more in charge of things like what clothing I was going to wear. Silly things, like silly but important, because my mom, I had two brothers. So when we were all home, she was taking care of all three of us. My dad was a butcher. He left for work very early in the morning, except on Sunday. And so being at camp, I could decide what I was going to wear. I could change what I was going to wear. And I could really, was coming more into my own. And I went to camp for a number of years. And I really, you know, loved going to camp because of this freedom and fun and, you know, being with my peers and being with my disabled peers. I think that was also really valuable, that being with my disabled peers, we had much more in common as far as being able to talk about barriers that we were experiencing in our communities, in school, even though, you know, my parents had high expectations for me, as did many of my friends' parents for them. Nonetheless, what we saw around us didn't mirror what we were being told. So I didn't know anybody who had, you know, a physical disability who was working except for President Roosevelt, and he was dead. And he was a man. And so, I mean, certainly there was no thinking about a disabled woman becoming a president, and Jewish at that also. So that was like not in the cards. But really, I think on a serious note, what was really valuable was that we, in our own way, at an age appropriate level, were beginning to look at, we couldn't just complain about the problems. It was really important that we began to think of solutions. Even if we didn't know how we were going to get to them, that also made us start to think about the importance of collaboration and cooperation with other people and other organizations. And then also, you know, it was, we had dances, and in our communities, you know, disabled people were not really dancing publicly. And, you know, frequently if you were, it was like, oh, isn't that cute? Blah, blah, blah. So it was frequently really embarrassing as opposed to really being creative. You know, Ali Stroker was not on Broadway at that point. And, you know, so it was an opportunity to learn. It was an opportunity to kind of play different roles. And I think, as you mentioned, John, it was also, you know, an opportunity to date. And it's not that kids necessarily didn't date at home, but it was different because, in the city, the transportation wasn't accessible. We couldn't just pop into someone's house because they had steps. And so all of that was not at camp.
We have a lot of college students on the call tonight, and you write about your own college experience in your memoir. And you talk about how it was really one of the first times in your life where you connect kind of politics to disability rights, and you start to really, it seems, start to raise awareness. Could you talk a little bit about your college years?
Sure. So I went to Long Island University in Brooklyn. One of the reasons I went there was a small college campus, 1 square block. It wasn't very accessible, the dorm. I wanted to live in a dorm, and I thought I could live in a dorm in Brooklyn because if anything happened, my parents would be nearby. So when I went to LIU, I didn't have a motorized wheelchair, I think, in the beginning. No, I didn't. And which meant that I needed help getting from the dorm to my classes. And the dorm had a step into the bathroom and 2 steps into the building. So I was always needing assistance. And very different than camp. And so, how to approach people, how to know who might be willing to help and who might not, all of these different things that in many ways were uncomfortable. And but I did become a member of a sorority, Delta Phi Epsilon, and I think that was really important for me. One of my counselors was a member of D Phi E. She went to Syracuse, and she wrote to the sorority and said that they should reach out to me. Now, it was important for me because in order to become an official member of the sorority, you had to rush. And what that meant was you had to participate in activities. So I was in many ways shy around non-disabled people, not around disabled people ever. But it was this just feeling very different, and not having a motorized wheelchair. My life changed when I got the motorized wheelchair because I was able to move about myself. I didn't have to stay places I didn't want to stay. And I could try something but leave if I didn't like it. All kinds of things that I couldn't do before when I was dependent on people helping me. So I got out, I met people, I had a rush, I had to do different things like that. And I think that was really very important, as I was saying, because otherwise I probably would have stayed in my dorm room. And when I got involved with the sorority, it also meant that I was learning more about student government. And student government at one point, while I was at school, had been controlled by the fraternities and the sororities. But then in my junior year, that switched, and more of the progressives on campus were elected. And so that's the first time I ran for office. I lost. I lost by 9 votes. And I think that's why I'm so rabid about voting. One of the reasons, because I could count the 9 people that were going to vote for me, but said, oh, no, they didn't vote because you were a shoo-in, but I lost. And then I had a spinal fusion. And so I was actually not in school my upper junior year. I was in the hospital and then at home using something, a device that was like, what was it called? I can't remember the name, but it was a little device, and it would be taken from room to room, and the rooms had to be specially wired. And the woman that I had lost to dropped out of the office. So my friends ran the campaign and I was elected as junior class secretary. And then again for senior class secretary. But the sorority and getting involved in student government was really important. It's not that it took me over the hump completely, but it did begin to get me more out into the broader world, which was very important. And I think college and when I was denied my teaching license and made the decision to file a lawsuit, that was also another turning point for me because I passed the required tests that were offered in inaccessible buildings because there was no 504 ADA. And I was denied my teaching license because of paralysis of both lower extremities, sequelae of poliomyelitis. I was really not sure what I was going to do. I'd never been involved in a lawsuit. I knew nobody who'd been involved with a lawsuit. And in 1969, 1970, it was the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement, all types of things were going on. And I'd been involved to some degree in some of those activities. But when this great lawyer, Roy Lucas, who later was one of the attorneys who argued before the Supreme Court on Roe versus Wade, when he called to interview me for a book he was doing, I realized that I needed to interview him to potentially be my lawyer. So at the end of the discussion, I asked him if he would be my lawyer. And that was very important because really sitting on the fence, and I thought, oh my goodness, what if I became a teacher and what if I couldn't do a good job? Would that mean that they would never hire a disabled person as a teacher again? These kinds of big, I don't want to call fantasies because certainly at that point, and I would say still today, a joke in some of the disability community is if you hire a non-disabled person and they don't do a good job, does that mean you're not going to hire another non-disabled person? And people will smile and ha ha ha. But the truth of the matter is, you hire a disabled person and they may not work out, then there is all this kind of underground discussion. Well, maybe we made a mistake and let's not do, even if it isn't an above board conversation. So I think, for students and quite frankly, even for faculty and staff, these are all things that I think need to be discussed. I think, Maria, when she was talking earlier about hiding her disability, I think that's very commonplace. Now, I couldn't hide my disability, right? I'm in a wheelchair, I use a wheelchair. But nonetheless, I didn't necessarily feel comfortable about speaking up about things I needed if they weren't offered. That's why I think, remembering that universities, community colleges have been legally obligated since 1973 to be in compliance with the law. But, just like people were praising the academies for making a ramp, and I put a tweet out saying, this is the law, they shouldn't be praised. I think that's very important. It's good they did it. It was the right thing to do. And had they not, I hope they would have been sued. So let's be aware that I don't say we shouldn't hold back praise, but we need to be very cautious that we're not praising things for things that they should have done 30 years ago.
I'm going to just transition over to one of the comments that came in from an audience member, Neil Iden. He shared this. Neil Iden, who by the Veterans Affairs definition is a 100% homebound disabled veteran, has had both visible and invisible disability. And he asks, what do you think can be done to help those who have invisible disabilities?
Great question. And I think it's a very important one because as you can hear from me, and I think as you heard from Maria, one of the very important points is being able to talk about who we are. And when you have an invisible disability, in many cases, people don't even know that they have a disability. Or they feel like, well, my disability is not as bad as yours. In many ways, that really doesn't translate to that. It really means that you're having difficulty talking about it and that you're afraid of asking for something that you may not be able to get. And this whole, I think the implication is if you disclose that you have a disability and you potentially would like an accommodation and you don't get it and you're afraid, or you have to justify it. Some places getting an accommodation is easy, and other places they want a medical note, a this or that. All of those things make it more difficult to be able to feel comfortable in disclosing. I think it's important for people who have invisible disabilities to look at how do you express yourself? How do you allow people to know that you in fact have a hidden disability? How is it impacting your life? I think also looking at reaching out and being supportive of others and getting support from others is very important. Not feeling alone and recognizing that, yes, every person is an individual and we experience things in an individual way. But Kitty Cohn, who John, you've mentioned many times, was a really dear friend. And I used to call Kitty all the time. I ran for city council in Berkeley and I lost. I ran against a woman whose husband was a campaign manager. I never picked these things very well, but at any rate, so I lost. I was part of a progressive team that ran for mayor and Congress, etc. And at the celebration party, people were beginning to have a discussion about going to the movies. And I was in the circle where people were talking, but it was becoming very clear to me that they were not really including me in the discussion because not all the movie theaters in Berkeley were accessible. So nobody was saying, oh, well, we shouldn't go to this movie, or Judy, do you want to go to the movies, or da, da, da. So when I kind of like, I don't know if you ever faded out, I kind of faded out from the group. And when I went home, I called Kitty and I said, Kitty, am I a Martian? And we laughed and I explained what happened. But I always talk about, am I a Martian? So I think for people who have invisible disabilities or whatever your disability may be, needing to feel proud of who you are and that your disability is a part of who you are. You may be having all kinds of issues because of your disability, pain or whatever it may be, but nonetheless, owning that part of you is important. I think, I can't speak for anybody else, but for me, being able to speak up and out is something that I think is very important. And it's not just a disability issue. It's a gender, it's sexual orientation, it's race, it's religion. It's something where, you feel that harm may be done by disclosing and grabbing it and basically fighting to keep it away. And then working with other people who have similar experiences as well as similar objectives. It's getting back to the first question that John asked me about going to camp. One of the things that was important for me about going to camp, as well as having disabled friends, is really this ability to what I call coming together to go apart. Coming together to really, get reassurance, kind of be charged up, to be able to, I have a couple of close friends and I will call them with some of the most bizarre things. I'm flying and I have to wear a diaper because the bathroom isn't accessible. I'm flying overseas and I need a diaper that's going to be strong enough that I can drink and not dehydrate for 2 days. You know, those are hard discussions. And, you know, calling friends and just saying, this is really a mess. But for me, it's, I've got to find that diaper because I'm not going to not go on the trip. I'm going to take my motorized wheelchair and I'm going to make damn sure that what I need is there, even if I'm going to a rural area where there's no electricity. And I think that's it, it's being resilient. And I don't want to say that all problems can be resolved because they can't. Not necessarily on the spot, but I really think it's believing that ultimately they can be.
We have a student by the name of Jasper who'd like to ask you a personal question. So we're gonna spotlight Jasper.
Hey, Jasper. What
Hi.
year of school are you in?
Sorry,
What grade are you in?
I'm a freshman.
What are you studying?
I'm a history major. Want to
Okay.
become a teacher, special ed.
Okay, great. What's your question?
Have you ever felt that your disability hindered your full potential, and how did you overcome those thoughts?
It's a good question. I think I firmly believe that other people thought that. And that the way the system was set up when I was younger. In my book, I talk about how I wasn't able to go to school until the middle of the 4th grade. So I didn't go to kindergarten. I had a teacher for the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and half of the 4th grade. Only came twice a week for a total of 2.5 hours a week. And so very clear that either all the other children were receiving way more education than they needed, 6 hours a day times 5, or people felt that people like myself, they didn't really think about our futures. They didn't really think that we could participate, make a difference. So those are things that, you know, it's very important for me that my parents and some of my friends' parents were also, you know, not into accepting what the broader society had laid out for us or not laid out for us. And so I think it also made me and friends stronger. I think, you know, I certainly am very opposed to segregated classes and segregated schools. And, but on the other hand, I think we really need to look for ways that younger disabled kids can meet other disabled kids, not just for an hour, you know, but where people can really have time to be together, camp or different social activities. But whether you have a visible or invisible disability, I think it really is so important to be able to speak about it, how you feel about it. And it is different. I mean, for me, I can't speak for anybody else, but, you know, my parents were very supportive. But the reality is they didn't get it the same way many of my friends got it. They were observing what was happening to me. They knew it wasn't good, but the visceral effect, you know, on me and my friends was something that we could experience. And of course, each one of us experienced it differently, but it was something that many of us felt we needed, for the good and the bad, to talk about it with other people, you know, to laugh and say, wow, this didn't happen the way I thought it would, or it did, and what should I do? So like with the teaching, you know, I spoke to my family, I spoke to my friends after I was denied the license, and I talked with them about how I was afraid. You know, should I do a lawsuit? Should I not? What happens if I can't do the job well? Because I'd never student taught, because no one knew that I was interested in being a teacher, because no one ever asked me why I was taking classes in education. Nobody. So, you know, all these kind of weird things that went on. But yeah, did I answer your question, Jasper?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Good luck.
We have another person who'd like to ask you a personal question. We're going to bring Laura up into the spotlight here.
Hey, Laura.
Hi, Judy. How are you tonight? Thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Laura Dicker. I work for the Dawn Center for Independent Living. I'm their independent living pre-ETS coordinator. A lot of what I do is I work with a lot of the younger individuals, a lot of the transitioning students. So what would your top advice be to younger individuals to help motivate them and help them understand how important it is to continue to fight and move the disability movement forward?
I mean, I think juniors and seniors, it's almost late. It really needs to be happening when kids are younger. You know, it's not just disability, it's whatever. But if you're in a minority status and you need to be building up that resilience. Now, if it hasn't happened, it hasn't happened, and you deal with it when you can. But I think it's important. I also think it's important to get parents engaged much younger, because all too frequently, and this is not just a disability issue, but I think in some ways it is very much a disability issue, because if you're as parents not seeing your kids as adults, if you're not seeing, you know, adults like your children who are working and participating in society, it's not just the children that aren't getting the appropriate role models, the parents aren't either. And then if there's a backdrop of other professionals who are not encouraging about what, you know, their child may or may not be able to do, that's also a problem. So I think we need to listen to kids. And I think they need to be with others who are, you know, both their age, but also some that are older, you know, 5-10 years older or older, but, you know, people who can relate. I mean, when I worked at CIL, and I moved from Brooklyn to Berkeley in about 1973, and I'd gone to Washington for a year and a half while I was getting my MPH at Berkeley. And a friend of mine, if you watch Crip Camp, Stevie Hoffman, we went to elementary school together, and he moved out to Berkeley. And we had gotten a grant to, I think it was writing a report on disabled youth. And they got together and they met a number of times and talked about what their issues were. And, you know, we had decided that we wanted to get this grant because we didn't want older adults in our 20s, 30s to be writing this book, this report, because we thought it would be different if we wrote it versus they wrote it. The unfortunate truth was we would have written the same thing that they wrote, because things hadn't changed that much. But I think really making sure that disability history is being included in school. Being selective about textbooks that are being used, making sure that books that are being written by disabled individuals are in fact being assigned as reading, not just for the disabled students. Looking at bringing people in, looking for opportunities for people to meet other people like themselves. And I also think it's really important that kids are getting, work opportunities, summer internships, volunteer programs. Again, where for me, when I went to university, I didn't go to camp for most of the summers. I was working. I worked in a senior center, and I was like a social worker assistant. But it was good for me to get that work experience. Just like everything else I was discussing, it was getting out there, doing things, recognizing that you could contribute. So, I mean, I think in many ways, younger people may not have images of what they could do because they're not seeing. Again, you can have an invisible disability in what I'm saying. They don't see or hear or learn about others like themselves. And I think they have to, and it's really important to be able to honestly talk about things that are working and are not working and how you deal and on and on. I think it should be a discussion that's above board and shouldn't be waiting till kids are 16.
Thank you so much.
How many staff at your center? Do you know?
So we do independent living, we do early intervention, and then we also do DDD support coordination. So I believe we are at or around 50.
50, and a lot
And
of
we
your money.
cover, and we cover 3 counties. We cover Morris, Sussex, and Warren County, and here in New
And are
Jersey.
you a CIL?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
We want to respect your time. Is it okay if we ask 1 or 2 more questions?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. This one comes in from John, who asked me to speak on his behalf. What advice would you give to disability service specialists in balancing the partnership with parents as their students with disabilities transition to college? You touched upon this earlier. What kind of advice would you give to the DSS specialist to help parents out on this journey too?
Well, I think it is important for parents to be involved in the discussion. And I would say that it's ideal if parents can be meeting other parents who have children that are older and have been through some of these experiences. Again, to the extent that that can be happening before the kids are, 16, 17, 18 years old, I think is good. That doesn't happen in many ways, but I think it's ideal. But, treating the parents like they treat parents of kids without disabilities, there are boundaries, and those boundaries should be honored. And I think it's also important to really have an understanding of the relationship between the family and the child and our young adult. And every family is different. But if you have the child who's got lower expectations than the parents, or the parents that have lower expectations than the child, or if people are coming forward as a blank slate or reasonably blank slate, it's really looking at where people are at. But I definitely think being able to get other parents who've been through this. Obviously, I would be looking for parents who can talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, but in the end, the goods come out of it, and be good role models, as well as for the youth themselves or young adults to be able to talk about just what I'm talking about now at an age-appropriate level.
We have a lot of other questions, but I'm going to try to summarize into one final question for you from some of our audience members. It kind of looks towards the future a little bit. When the ADA was passed, it was a sweeping legislation that got bipartisan support, and it is difficult in today's day and age to see such sweeping legislation receiving bipartisan support. But we also know that change needs to happen, continual change. So how do the people on this call tonight join the movement? How do they impact the future?
Well, first, I think you need to look for the organizations that exist in your community, and they don't necessarily have to be disability organizations. You might be interested in voting, so look at the organizations that are doing voting. You might be interested in women's issues. Look at the organizations that are working on women's issues, or labor, or whatever it is. And I think being able to work with disability groups as well as working with other groups is very important. It's the disability community is still relatively small. So getting involved with the disability community as an activist is always important. But then I think really trying to link up with other groups is also very important to have a bigger impact. And I want to say that there is a lot more that we need to be doing with our elected representatives. I believe very much that as disabled people, we need to expect that our elected representatives know the issues that are important to us. I mean, it does mean that we have to vote. It does mean that we may want to run for office or serve on committees. It does mean, depending on how much you want to get involved, that you need to understand politics. You need to understand how people are elected to positions. You need to understand who does appointments. You need to understand many issues that will vary from the city to the county to the state to the federal. Like what does a US senator do? How do judges get appointed? Most people have no idea about this. You need to know, and you need to know the politics. I'm not telling you what politics you should have. It's kind of apparent, I'm sure, but you're going to have whatever you want. But at the end of the day, if disability is something that's important to you and you believe in equity and equality and justice, then you really, as a group of people, I believe, need to allow people who are running for office to answer questions, and questions that they have a responsibility to answer. Or if they don't answer, they get called out on it. So I think it's being more visible, being more thoughtful, being more demanding. And, you know, this is many years ago, but when I was in Berkeley and working at the center, people respected CIL. They knew that we registered people to vote. They knew how many of the people that were involved with CIL voted. And over time, you got to see in their literature how they talked about the role that they played with CIL. In some cases, I was laughing because they hadn't done what they said. But nonetheless, it was interesting that they felt they wanted to put that in. And it wasn't literature just for disabled people. It was literature, campaign literature. So, you know, for me, the 2022 election is going to be critical because we have such a slim margin at the federal level. And then at the state level, again, I don't know. I know that you have a Democrat who is the governor right now. I don't know what the balance is on the House and Senate side for the state level, but we need to be active out there. We need to hold people accountable. Disability needs to be a word that they're using in all their campaign literature, in all their campaign speeches. And we all know when someone running for office is kind of trying to placate us, or they don't really understand the issues. If you like them and you believe they should be elected, you need to have hard discussions with them. You need to know, do they understand issues around benefit programs? Do they understand, you know, the penalties that disabled people have to face because we can't earn above a certain amount of money? And for people who, you know, the importance of education, personal assistance, sign language interpreter, employment, whatever the deinstitutionalization, COVID, whatever the issues may be. And I think we all need to be able to speak up and out much more. And we need to go to regular campaign meetings and ask questions, hard questions, politely, but firmly, and have other people with you so that people begin to recognize that we are expecting them to be including us in everything that they're doing. That's my feeling.
Do you think you learned a lot of that during the sit-in in the 1970s? As my final question.
No. I think I was learning that way before. I don't think that's something I could have been learning in 77, because by 77, we had learned a lot. And, you know, we didn't really know what the hell was going to happen. You know, we didn't really plan for the sit-in. I know in the movie, Anne says, Judy said, bring a toothbrush, and that was true. But there were only a couple of us. We didn't know what was going to happen. But, you know, Kitty and I had talked about, well, it takes so much to organize to get to that building that we thought if we get there and we're not getting what we want and we leave, we'll never get back in. And so because the people that we were meeting with really knew nothing about what we were talking about, it wasn't just their fault. It was also that Secretary's office in Washington, D.C. clearly was not taking these demonstrations seriously. And, you know, we just decided that we knew we couldn't leave. And we had been doing organizing. Kitty, as you know, from her readings, belonged to an organization where community organizing was a big part of the work that she did. Before her disability, Kitty didn't always use a wheelchair. It was over time that her muscular dystrophy got more progressive. And we wouldn't have been able to have a good demonstration if we didn't think about and know about many of the things I've been discussing. Now, we continue to refine it in the building and making connections, but when we went into the building, we knew senators, we knew the mayor, we knew other people. It wasn't something that we were just forming.
Well, on behalf of the team at the Legacy Project at CCM, on behalf of Maria and the Office of Accessibility Services, Judy, thank you so much for this evening. We really enjoyed it.
It's great to be with all. Did anybody take a picture?
Oh, can we take one right now? I'm going to take one right now. So maybe everyone can get ready.
Smile, look up.
3, 2, 1. Okay, I think I got it.
You know what? Maybe the other interpreter can come on. So
Absolutely.
you're both here. Ta-da! Okay, we'll take one more picture.
1, 2, 3. Thank you so much, Judy.
Thank you.
Have a great night, everyone.
Bye. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Send me the picture.
Absolutely.